Welcome to Powering the Future Within, the podcast where we explore the breakthroughs shaping the future of MedTech. I'm Omari Bouknight, CEO of Resonant Link Medical. Each episode, we speak with a leader who is driving the next wave of medical innovation, advancing technologies that are smarter, less invasive, and more connected than ever before. This is where the future of health takes shape. Let's dive in. Today, I'm excited to welcome Rob Binney to the podcast. Rob is a seasoned MedTech executive and CEO with more than 2 decades of experience leading innovative healthcare companies from early development through commercialization, growth, and successful acquisition. He currently serves as CEO of ShiraTronics, a company developing a novel neuromodulation therapy for chronic migraine. Over the course of his career, Rob has held several leadership roles across a number of high-growth medical technology companies, helping bring new therapies to patients while creating significant value for investors, clinicians, and healthcare systems. Today, we'll explore the lessons he's learned building medtech companies, leading teams through clinical inflection points, and turning breakthrough technology into lasting clinical impact. Rob, welcome to Powering the Future Within.
Thanks, Amari. I really appreciate the opportunity, and not going to lie, you're setting a very high bar for radio voiced. So Joe Rogan, watch out! Very impressed. Very impressed.
Well, really excited to have you on the show. You know, I followed your career for quite some time, back to Intersect ENT, and one of the aspects of your background that I find really interesting is that you've spent a good portion of your career really focusing on conditions that have generally been unaddressed or underaddressed by medical technologies. I'm curious, what got you into medtech to begin with, and what draws you to these domains that require fairly significant medical education and market development? What really gets you going?
Yeah. Well, thank you for the question, and I'll try to encapsulate my MedTech career and that passion for market development and innovative therapies quickly. I think, as you know, I was a 10-year veteran in the pharmaceutical space back in the 90s. And after a series of acquisitions, during that time, I had a couple of very good friends that had moved over to medical technology and specifically Boston Scientific. And I remember speaking to them daily, and they were talking about, the speed with which innovation was happening, and they were getting really excited about this new drug-eluting stent launch for coronary, artery disease. And I just was enamored, with again the level of satisfaction they had in their role, and then also the speed with which it appeared that medical technology was addressing unmet needs, and in this case, it pertained to the advent of drug-eluting stents. And so I actually, an opportunity came up, and I made a switch to Boston Scientific and had a chance to join SciMed at the time, the SciMed division, which involved the launch of Taxus and also their peripheral line of interventional products. And that began the lifelong passion for me of being a part of high growth med tech companies. Now, obviously, back then Boston was still just a rocket ship of growth, right? It was not near the market cap it is today, but it was just an exciting time to watch a company go from being a bare metal stent company to all of a sudden introducing this, landmark technology that, was just taking the world by storm and advancing clinical care. And candidly, I thought that I was going to retire at Boston Sci. Boston had a way of making you feel like you'd reached the apex, and that was until I met Fred Kashravi and Leslie Trigg, and they convinced me that taking a ride with them right into a small private equity backed company at the time it was Access Closure, and launching this new innovative platform that was spinning out of Fred's incubator was the best thing for my career. And I remember distinctly Leslie and Fred telling me that if I played my cards right, that would be the last time I had to update my resume. And life is always good by when you look back in the rear view, and but it was quite fortuitous because, as it were, it was the last time I've updated a resume. It was 2006. So, I had a chance to participate again in a high growth private equity, organization at Access Closure. We were introducing a novel therapy, trying to flip the kind of the stale static world of vascular sealing on its head. And I had a chance to work with just some incredibly talented individuals. And I got a flavor for, what a, 0 to $70 million a year type business, was all about. And I had just a MBA type of learning experience, in that, several years, 5 years that I was there. And then as you point out, from there, my career has really followed suit. It's been a rinse and repeat, not in the same therapeutic areas, and that's been by design. I've had a chance to launch a novel, drug-eluting stent platform and at Intersect ENT, and then followed by a novel, device for postpartum hemorrhage at Lydia. And now I've got the opportunity. We're on the precipice of being able to launch a novel approach to treating chronic migraine. And again, it's by design. I find great satisfaction in learning new therapeutic areas. But what you'll notice is the common denominator is that I have sought out game changing, opportunities, ones that candidly require a heavy lift from a market development standpoint. It requires a certain skill to be able to, introduce novel technologies to a market, and oftentimes in marketplaces that have existing standards of care. And at the end of the day, that's really where I've anchored my career, and it's something that's been very fulfilling for me personally.
Right. So if you go back to that decision, you're at Boston Scientific, SciMed, and then Boston Scientific, as you mentioned, part of one of the most probably prolific launches in the history of medical technology, rolling out drug-eluting stents, which I think is probably one of the fastest adopted technologies in history. A great company, you're looking at making your rest of your career there. What was it about those conversations that made you willing to make the jump into a private company?
I wish I had a dazzling answer for you here, but I really don't. Earlier in my career, I will say that, some of my moves, in particular, going from Boston Scientific to Access Closure, was a bit of happenstance. The one uh, key attribute is that I have historically in my career followed people that I believe in, people that I find to be extremely intelligent. They're at the top of their game, great strategists and innovators. And in Fred Kashravi and Leslie Trigg, I found just that, and they told a compelling story, and I followed. And I will tell you that it was the best career decision that I ever made. I think my next moves were much more intentional, but back then, it was one of really belief in people, and I believe very much in what Fred and Leslie were doing.
Well, you must have great instincts on people because those are two super high quality legendary names in the space.
I think I do. So, well, I may not be the smartest guy in the world, but I do have some decent intuition when it comes to people.
Yeah, and great intuition around people with the Intersect ENT. That's one of the stories that required significant market development and education. And you joined even pre FDA approval, I believe, and then helped lead the growth to over $100 million in sales over time. What were some of the lessons? What did it take to go from 0 to 100?
Um, you know, I would say all the descriptors of what you would expect, in a early stage startup applied here, right? I mean, adaptability, a growth mindset, being resilient, not being afraid to fail, being relentlessly focused on execution, hiring exceptional talent, like all of those, were applicable in the Intersect ENT story. um, I will tell you that I did, to your point, join pre-FDA approval, and much like our last, point that we made around people, I was the benefactor of being able to follow Lisa Earnhardt to Intersect, and Lisa, as you know, is the best of the best. And being able to join, just after our pivotal study was completed prior to FDA approval, I had ample time to spend with her and to ideate on what a good limited commercial launch might look like. And I will tell you that, again, when you go into these commercial launches, you don't know what you don't know. So I think being really thoughtful about, sort of every phase of the launch is critically important. And what I mean by that is, earning the right to move to the next phase of growth and expansion. And that was the type of approach that we took with Intersect ENT. And I'll contrast access closure to Intersect ENT. Access was a tremendous growth story, but our priorities at times really were driven by top line growth, and we drove a lot of it. Whereas when Lisa and I sat down, some of the sort of guiding principles that we aligned to was, you know, really articulating clearly what are the metrics that will define our success, right? Meaning, we wanted deep adoption and penetration in a handful of territories, and we prioritize what we would call quality revenue over quantity, right? And we were able to go into a handful. In this case, it was 6 territories. And I broke that first phase into what I called the education phase, right? We had a license to learn, we had a license to fail. And during that time, we were taking our original, playbook that we thought was the right go-to-market strategy, and we were refining. Because in our case, at Intersect in the first year, there were a couple of speed bumps, right? And you have to be adaptable, be able to, look at problem and find new solutions. And those are the type of people we tried to hire for the original commercial team. And at that point, again, we had a really crisply articulated set of metrics that were usually built around, again, defining that recipe for success around depth, adoption, penetration. And we were, learning along the way, and then ultimately earning the right to the next phase of growth. So phase one was education. Phase two, I called replication. At that point, we were really focused on getting reps to cash flow break even, and then helping them to, again, pay for themselves. And once we did, replication phase was earned, and we made a conscious decision to go into what I would call tier two and tier three markets. So instead of going to the New Yorks, the Atlantas, the Houstons, the Dallas, we actually opted to go hire best athletes in Tulsa, Oklahoma. We
Right.
went into upstate of New York, like Syracuse, Albany area. To into San Francisco, and California is not always a tier one market due to some of the the health ecosystem there, and payer mix and whatnot. But we went into those markets, and what we were trying to do was replicate the early success that we had in phase one, that education phase. And sure enough, and during that phase, by the way, we also started to pilot new roles, right? Maybe take a little cost out of the model. Looked at maybe some junior reps, market development specialists, per diems, to help all support growth. And again, that focus on driving depth and adoption. And at that point, right, having worked through the education, then the replication phase, that was when the board kind of looked at me and was like, "Well, what are you waiting for? Right? It's time
Yeah,
to execute." And I really think that that thoughtful approach was the right one toward building that market. Because at that point, when we got the green light, like let's go execute, let's go out and grow, exponentially. At that point, we kind of really had things tight, right? We had the playbook refined, the objection handling, the targeting, the hiring profiles, all that was really well baked, so that we could, in essence, kind of put on a clinic when we had the resources to go out and scale and grow, quickly. And we did that, as a result of having a successful IPO, and the rest was kind of history, if you will.
yeah. I can imagine in the early years there was just a tremendous amount of learning, and it sounds as though you were pretty thoughtful about putting in place key performance indicators, or at least learning what those were, so you could really understand how you could replicate it. I love those different phases of the launch. I'm curious. So, I mean, we're talking about Intersect ENT, so obviously we're talking about the ENT space, and you're focused on chronic sinusitis. My understanding is the operator, the one who would perform these procedures, it wasn't so typical for them to have medical technology reps as a call point. They weren't so used to being called on, if you will. I'm curious if you started to kind of uncover a profile of the type of physician who would be more interested in adopting an innovative technology like this versus others.
Yeah, and I guess just a point of clarification. So the ENT specialty, I would suggest you actually was accustomed to having, med device representation, and that was our primary call point, right? These are the ENT surgeons. Acclarent had just gone before us, and so they had done a nice job of building, the balloon sinuplasty market. And they're historically, to your point, they maybe didn't have as much exposure to med tech reps that were introducing novel, innovative, disposable technologies like we were. I would say, Clarent and Tellus and then us were sort of a new breed, if you will, because a lot of times prior, the surgical procedures were rigid instruments, right? I mean, it was a, surgical procedure or navigation. So they did have, some exposure to, the med tech profile. And so when we came in, I don't think it was a heavy lift. I mean, I think at that point, McLaren had done a really nice job of, I'd call it seeding the market, right, and setting the expectation. We did walk into a little bit of a political struggle because, again, as McLaren introduced, a novel new procedure and technology, it created some, fraction within the specialty, meaning, the some of the key opinion leaders, rhinology thought leaders weren't as, I think, appreciative of the necessarily the, introduction to, the market of a new technology like that. And so we kind of walked into a little bit of the crossfire, but we were able to, I think, act as a unifying force as an organization.
Right. Okay. So you would say that that call point, the physician was eager and interested in seeing new technology brought through.
I think that there was some receptiveness, for sure. And again, I give the balloon sinuplasty teams a lot of credit for really priming the market, if you will. And I think what we ended up doing was think brought a first of its kind, PMA approved platform technology, with good science behind it, and that was in essence a little bit of a differentiator, from, say, the balloon sinuplasty companies, and we were really proud of that. We had, level 1A evidence, and candidly, I think the team did just a remarkable job of again introducing, a very disruptive and innovative platform like, the Propel stent, during a time when there was a lot of political kind of churn going on within the specialty. I think they did a great job with it.
Fantastic. That's fantastic. So up to that point, you kind of charter your path and a lot of experience in vascular, neurovascular, cardiovascular. moving into the ENT space is a little bit of a pivot, but at the same time, still that kind of stent profile. But in 2020, you stepped into the role at Alydia Health, which developed the Jada device for postpartum hemorrhage. The company and the technology has been a fantastic success in such a needed area. Curious on your perspectives on what were some of the important success factors there.
Yeah, I had a 9-year run at Intersect, and it was again, much like the time at Access Closure, was a fantastic learning experience for me. And I had several CEO opportunities come across my desk, and I really had vowed that I wasn't gonna. I was so committed to our team and our success, and wanted to continue, to grow there. But at the same point in time, I was getting the bug, right, of trying new things, and the CEO role became, pretty appealing to me. And Lydia just, I connected with the story at Lydia. I very much am a mission driven person. At the end of the day, it's what gets us up every day. And if you can have, a mission like we had at Lydia, boy, you get up pants on fire every single day. I mean, we had the opportunity to introduce a novel new treatment option for the treatment of postpartum hemorrhage and abnormal uterine bleeding in a space that was largely run by pharmacologics, right?
Right.
Typically when a bleed happens, physicians customarily would just use ShiraTronics, and it's very difficult to identify who the responders are going to be. So when one didn't work, they use another, then they use another, right? And threw the kitchen sink at them. And we were using just a novel platform that used simple wall suction that was in the OR, in the delivery room, and we were mimicking the effects mechanically of a uterotonic. Essentially, we were trying to draw in the walls of the uterus, which then triggered to the body, right, that we need to stop, pushing blood into the uterus, right? Baby's been delivered, time out, right? And so, and it was a when you look at it, it was a simple concept and an absolutely brilliant idea. And so I was connected to, again, the innovative, aspects of the platform, and really driven by a mission of saving moms, preserving families, that it just became a no-brainer for me. The board dynamic was great. We had an opportunity, when I joined, to raise a small round of fundraising, and then, was able to just submit our 510(k) submission, and then oversee, the approval, and then had the chance to do what I really love to do, which is, hire the initial, commercial team. And
Yeah.
just so happens that a number of those individuals were individuals that were some of the founding team at Intersect. So we kind of
Oh, wow.
rinsed and repeated. And I'm a big believer that you don't necessarily need to have domain expertise when you're launching these early startups. You need to have market builders. You need to have
Right.
people that know how to introduce technologies. You need to have people that know how to extract key learnings and then refine playbooks. And all those elements, were in the DNA of the early, Lydia team. And to your point, I look at the success now, and I really do think that, some of those early decisions we made around, targeting, around, market introduction, around messaging, all, carried through, with regard to our, longer term execution. So.
So one of your first major milestones or targets was to raise funding. What was your experience like with fundraising at that time and in that space?
Yeah, it's a different scale. Women's health, unfortunately, it just does not command the same level of investment, same level of attention, despite the fact that, women make up most of the healthcare decisions, and obviously comprise a big portion of the population. And unfortunately, it just, when I contrast the fundraising experience at Alydia to the fundraising experience with a company like ShiraTronics, it's night and day different. But the good news is we had a handful of investors that, believed in the mission. They believed in, our early commercial plans. They believed in the technology, and they took the risk. And lo and behold, it ended up paying off for them. I will say, after we had, and this is pretty typical of any startup, after we had burned down a number of risks and gotten approval in hand, I was running a parallel path of a Series D at that time.
Mm.
With all the risk that we had burned down, there was a lot more interest, and I do believe we were going to be able to raise a much larger round, had we not transacted. But as it were, we ended up with three offers and ended up transacting to Organon.
Wow. Well, and hopefully with the great success at Alydia, it has helped or is helping to unlock additional investment in the space. Um, but it's certainly the case that as you drive commercialization, you start to have some success. Hopefully, that also unlocks additional opportunity.
Indeed. Yep. We're seeing, I had hoped to see more deal flow in women's health as a result of our exit, because it was a really great return for investors. And I just haven't seen the transactions happen at the pace I would like to see. And I think it's unfortunate, because there's some really great assets out there with some real innovation. But that said, I've seen a lot more activity, a lot more focus on women's health, and I believe it's coming. It's just been a little bit slower than I had hoped, because the space deserves attention.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so let's talk transition to ShiraTronics in another space that requires attention, which is chronic migraine. It's been classified by the World Health Organization as a top five disabling condition globally, yet it's still rarely talked about with the same urgency as some other chronic serious conditions. Why do you think it's been so much underestimated or undertreated?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I appreciate you uh, kicking off our discussion around Sheratronics, with that question. It's unfortunately it has a frustrating answer for many, as it, in my estimation, underscores the gap between disease burden and public perception. I think it's important, I guess, to note that, migraine is largely an invisible disease. People with migraine, candidly, they look healthy, and depending on the day, they can operate like any non-migraineur would. They don't have casts. They're not in wheelchairs. They don't have visible tremors that identify you as a migraineur. And as a result, those that suffer with it, they often do so in silence and without recognition. Unfortunately, most human beings, myself included, empathetically, you connect with those with conditions, that you can see, and that carry mortality with them. Patients taking, cancer treatments on a weekly basis and are sick all the time. I get it. Patient that had a stroke and is rehabbing from partial paralysis. Got that. A patient with Parkinson's and living with uncontrollable tremors. Yep. I kind of get that one as well. But a patient that was just at work yesterday, laughing with coworkers, but now can't seem to get out of bed, for 2, 3 days. And that one's just a little bit of a head scratcher. Appears a little less severe to me, or just in terms of perception. So I think that is a big, barrier that we have to overcome as it pertains to, creating more sensitivity to those that suffer with migraine. Um, the reality is that the word headache somewhat trivializes the disease and the suffering, as most remember a time like when you have a hangover and you got a headache, or you had a head cold and you've got your head hurt. It's a very different experience than what a migraineur goes through. Their condition involves a complex neurological disorder that involves altered brain function, sensory perceptions, and pain pathways. And the net is, to describe what a migraine feels like to a non-migraineur,
Yeah.
it's just extremely hard to explain. Our founder, Dr. Muda Jain, does suffer with episodic migraines, and he'll tell you that when they happen, you completely shut down your functionality. You literally want to lop off your head. And I am a non-migraineur, but I've talked to enough patients that have described very similar experiences, if you will, and descriptors of what a migraine feels like. And the net is unless you've had one, it's really hard to sympathize. And I think that becomes a challenge, for those of us that don't suffer with migraines. These patients, unfortunately, they become masters of hiding their pain. They show up to work with 20% battery power, right? They show up to family and friends events, but deep down they feel horrible if they can actually show up. And they're a very resilient population, but unfortunately, that resilience becomes a little bit paradoxical in that it oftentimes make it seem like their disease is less severe. So there's a number of reasons there. I could go on as well about women's health. 2/3 of the population are women, and unfortunately, I don't think women's health garners the attention it needs. And so, anyways, I could spend hours talking about it, but we're here to change the narrative here and to help create a lot of awareness around, the level of debilitation and impairment that migraine can create.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that you've really done a great job encapsulating and describing perhaps the disconnect between the experience and those who don't experience. One observation is that clearly you have the ability to kind of read and assess people really well, which would suggest that you have a strong level of empathy. And I think that probably is part of the reason why being mission driven is so important to you and the work that you do, but then also really the ability to understand what these patients are going through, even though you might not suffer from the condition itself. So the work that you all are doing with ShiraTronics is tremendous and incredibly exciting. And what we're talking about here is a neuromodulation implant. And to your earlier point, I would imagine for these patients that are really suffering from migraine aura, that a lot of them would be willing to do almost anything or try anything to try to find relief. And they've probably already cycled through multiple medications. What does it mean to you to serve this patient population where medicine has had some clear limitations?
Yeah, to your point, the population we are treating, and the population we treated in our pivotal study, have tried and either failed or have opted out of using, existing pharmacologic options. Right? They've tried the Botoxes, they've tried CGRPs, and yet they still have 15 or more headache days per month, which is really
Wow.
astounding if you think about it. And so to your point, many of these patients feel hopeless. They're so symptomatic. They still carry a very high degree of functional impairment, and at the same point in time, as I talked about in my last answer, right? They're just an extremely resilient population. They keep powering through. They've got optimism, right? They're constantly looking for new solutions, and that's really the sort of um, sweet spot for us, right? Is coming to the aid of patients that feel like they don't have a lot of other options right now, but yet they're still encouraged, they're still optimistic that hope is out there. And so for us, it is, it's sort of a unbridled passion, to get this therapy to market as fast as we can, because we believe that neuromodulation has a chance to give hope to those that feel hopeless. And so I'm encouraged. There's only so much I can share about our pivotal study. Just so you know, we have stopped enrollment of our pivotal and are prepared to unblind our data in the September-ish timeframe. Let's call it Q3 timeframe. And my hope is that with that news, comes a new level of hope for patients that are in need. That, to your point, maybe feel like they've been, left behind, if you will, with the existing pharmacologic options.
Right, right. And obviously we still have to go through all the process and see the clinical data, and you've been running a very rigorous pivotal trial. But in your pilot data, if you look at the 12-month results from Relief CM, you showed sustained symptom reduction in these patients. Was there a point where you were looking at that data and you felt the shift from this might work to, wow, I really believe this is actually going to matter for these patients?
Yeah, I think to answer that question, we have to look at the history of neuromodulation and the treatment of head pain. Believe it or not, and this is something that I learned along the way when I was vetting this opportunity. The treatment of head pain, migraine, and other phenotypes of head pain has been around for some time using neuromodulation. It actually started a couple of decades ago, using external systems and then that evolved into actually using, non-purpose built spinal cord stimulators to tunnel. So they would stick the can in the pectoral region or the lower back, and then they would tunnel up to at the time, the occipital nerve. And in that experience, there were so many positive indications that it was actually working that it actually, caused the likes of Boston Scientific, Medtronic, and St. Jude to actually commission their own RCTs.
Right,
So back in I think it was 2010, 11, 12 timeframe, they did execute their own RCTs, again, using a non-purpose built system. And meanwhile, during that time, all this off-label use continued. It proliferated to the tune of, I saw an estimate, it was like 750 cases a year. And so there were some indicators, right? There were, yeah, anecdotes that led, to these investments in these RCTs. Unfortunate piece is that they actually didn't meet their primary endpoint.
right,
But all this experience led to a lot of our key learnings. We believed at the time that they were using the wrong primary endpoints. The FDA was requiring more of a responder rate, like you see in many of the chronic pain studies, like with spinal cord stim and whatnot. But since that time, with the advent of CGRP and Botox, the agency has agreed that a better measure is mean reduction in monthly headache day. That's our primary endpoint, and actually, that's an important stat because if you go look at their those original RCTs, if they had used that as a primary, a couple of them actually achieved statistical significance with that secondary endpoint.
right.
But I also mentioned probably an even bigger point in all this is they had really high rates of mechanical failure.
Mm,
So, meaning I had mentioned to you that the leads were traversing the neckline, right? This region is where you've obviously got constant torquing and twisting of your head and whatnot, which was applying a lot of force on the lead, which was leading to lead fracture, lead migration. And again, that all traced back to the fact that they didn't have a purpose-built system.
right,
And then on top of it, the further evolution was that, we believe that approaching, not only the occipital nerve, but then targeting the supraorbital nerve enhanced your ability to bring relief to patients. So we folded all those key learnings into our approach. And I'm very proud of the fact that and I give our founders a lot of credit that the hypothesis that a subcutaneously placed, head located system that took leads out of this region in the neckline would lead to lower rates of mechanical failure, such as lead migration, and that has played out. In fact, at 1 year in our pilot study, again, small sample size, but we had a 0% rate of lead migration and
wow.
fracture at 12 months. And again, I can't share too much on our pivotal, but I'm hopeful that that same trend line, carries out.
Right, right. That's very exciting, and, you've done a fantastic job of kinda describing some of the early work, which showed a signal, but there was also, it sounds like, a lot of noise around the signal, and what you've done with the purpose-built technology is reduce the noise, focus signal only, and in addition, with kind of narrowing in on the clinical endpoints, it sounds like, put you in a different category and position than some of the other attempts previously. I'm curious, as you think about treating this patient population, we've had a couple conversations with leaders who have been tackling the field of epilepsy. And one of the points of conversation we've had is about turning down the noise with some of these patients where maybe you don't go from 15 occurrences of migraine or in a month down to zero, but you reduce it significantly. And in doing so, reduce the burden of disease. So this concept of, kind of reducing the noise or reducing the burden of disease is a worthy achievement with some of these technologies. Is that sort of your view that maybe you don't have to go all the way down to zero, but by dramatically reducing the burden, that you really transformatively change patients' outcomes and their outlook?
I totally concur with those sentiments, and I think that is um a wise expectation, right? And I've been told by neurologists over and over to, take a patient from 19 headache days per month to zero. Is possible, and we actually saw a little bit of evidence of that in our pilot. But to assume that you're going to completely eradicate headaches for a population, like this is not a realistic objective. What they will tell you and what they've told me is the focus needs to be on reducing impairment and improving functionality. And that's multifactorial, meaning if you can reduce a patient's headache days per month by a factor of, say, 3 or 5 or 6, that's a big win in and of itself. And if you look at the treatment effect size of the existing pharmaceuticals, and the pharmacologics, I mean, a CGRP treatment effect size is around 2.5 days, but but yet it's used with great frequency. So it shows you the level of sort of desperation and and need there, that a 2.5 day treatment effect size is worthy of taking a pretty expensive annual course of therapy, if you will. However, what's not captured in that mean monthly headache day reduction is the impact that your therapy may have on, for instance, the incidence of severe headaches. So that's an equally important measure. It's not caught in our primary endpoint, but what I would suggest to you is if you can reduce mean monthly headache day by, say, 4 or 5 days, and you can have an effect on incidence of the severe headaches, meaning when they happen, even if they are moderate headaches, right? You've taken them. That's the difference between a patient being in a dark room, sequestered, shutting down all stimuli, unable to go to the dinner table with their family, go to the grocery store, let alone go back to work. Those are the ones that knock you out, right? Those are the headaches that, again, you have full incapacitation. But if you're able to, take those incidences of severe headaches and actually convert them to moderate headache days, or, no or moderate headache days to no headache. Now the algorithm is starting to lead to improvements in functionality.
Right.
Same would apply if you can have an effect on duration of headache, a focus on reducing, monthly headache day, but then also having an effect on, the incidence of those severe headaches.
Yes.
And that equal in and of itself equals a restoration of functionality for patients. And that's really what we're trying to accomplish. So what I'm really excited about with our data when it comes out is not just looking at monthly headache day, but it's also looking at the effect that, we're having on severity of headaches, on the duration of headaches, on reductions in medication use, all those things that we're looking at in the secondary endpoint. And the net is the overarching goal is to reduce levels of impairment, to get patients out of dark rooms and then back to work, back to living life with their families, back to resuming hobbies, etc. And that is, again, like I said, kind of a multifactorial approach.
Yeah, yeah, it's so critical. I mean, we want to be objective. We need to be objective in order to be able to evaluate these technologies and these therapies. But there's so many different vectors which you can align on to show improvement and overall, like you say, net show improvement quality of life. So it's not just the number, but it's also the magnitude, it's the duration. That also is critical for these patients. And if you can get them to have medication reduction on top of that, talk about a win-win-win-win. So I'm curious, you've now led companies through FDA clearance, IPOs, a major acquisition, and you came up through the commercial organization. How has that commercial foundation shaped the way that you think about building companies and leading?
I think at the end of the day, you know, building companies like this and the my previous companies, it traces back to again grounding a team of incredibly accomplished individuals around a shared mission, galvanizing them toward a shared goal, and then again relentlessly executing on a plant, whether it's commercial. I mean, and I'll give you a little bit of a flavor here. I mean, I joined here in the development phase. I did that with intention, because I'd never been through V&V. I'd never been through DBT. I'd never, been through execution of a pilot study. Everything in my career prior had been, PMA all the way through IPO, through private, company exit. And I wanted to just round out the skill set. And what I would say is that a lot of the fundamental characteristics still hold true. It's right. It's hiring unbelievably talented individuals that are mission driven and relentlessly focused on delivering on what we say we're going to do. There are other elements that I have learned along the way that revolve around things like making sure that you manage cash really tightly, right? Because I see a lot of startups lean into big fundraisers. When we raised our Series B, it was 66 million, and um we could have gone and made a bunch of investments and whatnot, but it just so happens that we have an incredible group of individuals that were hired with intention here that I call Swiss Army knives. They're able to cover multiple domains. They have sophisticated skill sets that allows them to pick up work streams even outside of their own domain. And that has been a real key element of our ability to keep our burn down and continue to build this company without sacrificing or shortchanging anything. So again, whether I came up through commercial or came up through R&D or came up through regulatory, I think at the end of the day, the elements of building a commercial team are no different than building the elements of a early stage startup company. And again, it focuses on hiring really good people that have diverse skill sets, that can wear multiple hats, that are just absolutely relentlessly focused on doing what we say and saying what we do. Did I say that right? Saying what we do. Yeah, you know what I'm saying. And then also, are just grounded in a shared mission and are pulling and rowing the boat at the same time with the same amount of effort, to deliver. So, hope that answers the question.
Absolutely. At the end of the day, it's about putting the right people in the right role and giving them the right direction. And that's something that you've done exceedingly well throughout your entire career. And you can really see the hard work of the team paying off. You've had some recent announcements that are really exciting. As you mentioned, you completed enrollment in your US pivotal trial. Congratulations. Huge milestone. Took a lot of effort, but you got through in a really fast pace for these types of complex, challenging trials. And then you've also received dedicated procedure codes, which should set your technology up for reimbursement here in the US. So I have to ask, what's next?
Yeah, so the team will tell you I try not to get too far out ahead of my skis. Like it is inflection point to inflection point, and we have, to your point, crossed some really big value inflecting milestones. But the next one is September. September, October. We're gonna unblind our data. I'm excited about that. Uh, again, I try not to get too excited until I actually see the results. I mean, the results are the results, and proof's in the pudding. But that'll be our next milestone. Beyond that, in Q2 of next year or thereabouts, we will achieve our safety milestone, and then we will file our final module for PMA, in support of PMA. And then from there, we're looking at a limited commercial launch in the 28 timeframe, and we're off to the races. So in terms of getting this therapy to patients in need, and I'm really excited about that. I've been the benefactor of being able to be in front of patients, both in our pilot and our pivotal. And I will tell you that I've heard stories that will give you goosebumps in terms of the ability of our our therapy, the promise of our therapy to potentially give patients their lives back. And we have work to do, but I will tell you that, and I'll give you a small anecdote that if one of our patients up in New York is any indicator, she was a painter by trade. She had put her paintbrushes down for about a decade due to her evolving migraines that were 20 plus days per month. And after just a trial course of therapy, she was able to paint a painting of her, her hometown in Rhode Island for one of our field clinical engineers. And I call that painting hope
Yeah,
because it represents the opportunity for us to, again, give patients their lives back, gives them an opportunity to resume their hobbies, to reunite with their families. And at the end of the day, uh, we get one spin on this great globe of ours, and that's what I want to spend my time doing is trying to, have a meaningful impact on patient lives. And I think we're on the precipice of doing that. Again, a lot still has to be proved out, but to be able to, you know, potentially have that opportunity is something that I don't take lightly, and I'm very grateful for. So that's kind of what's next. I mean, beyond that, I think that my hope is that we'll see the field of bioelectronic medicine really start to accelerate. I think we're starting to see more and more evidence that these therapies work for chronic conditions. That there may be in some cases evidence of disease reversal. And I will say that I believe that the commitment to quality, robust clinical evidence is there in the space, and I think we're starting to see those trials prove out that I think we're just in the infancy of seeing what this type of therapy can do for patients in multiple chronic conditions.
absolutely, and that's incredibly powerful. So, unique to you, you have a brother, Tyler, who's also served as a MedTech CEO. So I have to ask, what's Thanksgiving like in the Binney household? Is it a support group, a competition,
That's
or do you
funny.
just refuse to talk
Yeah,
MedTech?
so Tyler and I both are obviously in the space. And I wish I could tell you that we spend all of our time at Thanksgiving dinner talking about business, but usually it's talking about a really nice bottle of wine, or maybe there's multiple bottles of wine and a good meal. So we don't spend a lot of time during Thanksgiving talking about things. But that said, we have our careers have paralleled for a number of years. Well, for the bulk of our careers, and it's been really nice to have a built-in confidant, somebody that you can on demand pick up the phone and problem solve with, share a tough day with, share in successes with. And, I like to think that we've been great support systems for one another throughout. And, I mean, I'm not gonna. I mean, I will point out that I have 3 exits and he's got 2, so there's no competition at all. And candidly, and I'll say this to his face, and you can ask him about this sometime, but had his big brother Rob not talked him out of leaving J&J many years ago to go to NeoTract, he may still be at J&J. So, but anyways, and all joking aside, we are, feel very fortunate to be able to lead and build companies that we've been a part of, and feel very fortunate to be a part of this generation of innovation that's taken place in medtech. So yeah. Anyways, I appreciate you asking that question. That was funny. Yeah.
Absolutely. So three versus two, but I believe you said earlier that it's the number, but also the magnitude. I think Tyler might mention that
Yeah.
pushback.
Indeed. Indeed. So we'll see if I can't post something else. We'll see.
So wrapping up here, any advice for commercial leaders that are out there and maybe have been on a similar path as you who might be interested in leading a venture-backed medtech company one day?
Yeah, I wish I had some life-changing advice. I would just say, we all, I think, evolve at different rates. If you were to ask me back in 2008, 10, would I ever see myself as a CEO? I was a commercial leader at the time, and the answer probably would have been no. I had the good fortune of being invested in by the people that I've talked to you about, right? From Leslie to Lisa, to Fred, and I've been surrounded by just unbelievable talent that has, allowed me to, sort of grow and evolve into the role that I'm in today, and the person that I am today. And what I would just suggest is, find, those mentors, right, and lean into them, learn from them, extract every single possible key learning that you can from them, because if you get the right ones, they will help you to help instill belief in yourself and help you to refine your leadership capabilities and attributes, and ultimately will be mentors for life. I still talk to Lisa, Leslie, etc., and I give them a lot of credit for, again, taking a a very green sales leader who didn't quite know exactly what they wanted to do, and made major investments in me, gave me seats at the table, and that's been a big reason why I think I've been able to you know uh, be afforded the opportunities that I have. And so, anyways, that would be my only advice, is just find those mentors and lean into them, and learn everything you can from them.
Yeah. Well, that's fantastic advice. Well, thank you so much for joining, Rob. This was a great, fantastic conversation. I think many will benefit.
Well, thank you. It was great to see you again, Amari, and appreciate the interest and opportunity to tell our story a little bit.
Absolutely, and we'll be following the ShiraTronics story very closely. We're really excited to see the pivotal data coming out later on in 2026.
Keep your fingers crossed.
I will.
Thanks so much.
And
Take care.
thank all of you for joining us today on Powering the Future Within. If this conversation inspired you, follow the show and share it with your MedTech community. I'm Omari Bouknight. Stay inspired and keep innovating.